police officer looked at my wife's uniform, then turned to the HOA president and said the 5 words that changed everything. "Ma'am, what are your orders?" But what happened in the next 20 minutes would expose a secret so dark. It would destroy 3 families and end with FBI agents at our front door. And it all started with a garden gnome. I bet you've never heard a neighbor war story like this one. Trust me. By the end, you'll have your own Karen story bubbling up that you'll want to share. Everyone has that neighbor. You know the one. But what I discovered about our neighborhood, Karen, would make me question everything I thought I knew about the people living right next door. My name is Jake Thompson. And 3 weeks ago, I was just another work-from-home tech consultant who thought the biggest drama in our suburban paradise would be someone leaving their trash cans out too long. I'm a former Marine who traded combat boots for house slippers. Completely devoted to my wife Sarah and honestly pretty conflict avoidant these days. After 8 years of military precision, civilian life felt like a vacation. I never wanted to end. Commander Sarah Thompson is Navy intelligence. In the kind of officer who can spot a security threat from 3 time zones away, but still remembers to text me grocery lists with little heart emojis. She'd just completed a 9-month classified deployment that I couldn't ask about and she couldn't discuss. But the exhaustion in her video calls told me everything I needed to know about how demanding those months had been. Then there's Margaret Whitman, though everyone calls her Peggy. And she calls herself our compliance director, despite holding absolutely no official position in our homeowners association. 58 years old, meticulously dressed even for grocery runs, and possessing the kind of razor-sharp attention to detail that she weaponizes against anyone who dares to park 6 inches over their driveway line. What I didn't know then was that her obsessive control over our neighborhood had nothing to do with property values and everything to do with a tragedy that had shattered her world 4 years earlier. Our story begins on a picture-perfect Tuesday afternoon in October, when Sarah's deployment finally ended and she was coming home to Cedar Ridge Estates. Our pristine little community where the biggest scandal was usually someone planting roses without HOA approval. I'd spent the morning cleaning our house until it sparkled, buying fresh flowers for every room. And yes, placing one small decorative garden gnome next to our front walkway, a silly little welcome home gesture that would soon trigger a neighborhood war I never saw coming. Sarah's silver Honda pulled into our driveway at exactly 2:17 p.m., and for those first precious moments, my world was perfect again. She stepped out wearing her dress blues, duffel bag over her shoulder, that tired but genuine smile lighting up her face in a way that made 9 months of lonely dinners instantly worth every sacrifice. I practically sprinted down our driveway like an overgrown kid on Christmas morning, wrapping her in my arms and spinning her around while she laughed with pure, unguarded joy. "God, I missed you," I whispered against her ear, breathing in that familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering smell of military life aboard ship. "It's so good to be home," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion and exhaustion. But our reunion lasted exactly 45 seconds before Peggy Whitman emerged from behind her perfectly manicured hedge like some kind of suburban predator who'd been lying in wait. She marched across our shared property line with her ever-present clipboard clutched against her chest and a measuring tape dangling from her wrist like some bizarre fashion accessory. "Stop right there," she shouted with the kind of authority usually reserved for actual emergencies. "That unauthorized lawn ornament violates Section 12.4 of our community standards." Sarah was still in my arms, clearly trying to process this unexpected civilian drama after months of military precision and genuine national security concerns. Her training kicked in automatically, maintaining diplomatic composure even while obviously bewildered by the sudden confrontation. "I'm sorry. What exactly is the problem?" she asked with polite confusion, her voice carrying that calm professionalism that comes from years of naval leadership. Peggy cranked up her volume like she thought shouting would somehow grant her additional authority in this twisted suburban hierarchy. She pointed accusingly at our innocent little garden gnome, to cheerful ceramic figure no taller than a coffee mug. "This flagrant disrespect for community standards ends today," she declared, waving her clipboard like it was some kind of official legal document. "I've been monitoring this property while you were gone serving on that ship, documenting every single violation, taking comprehensive photographs from multiple angles." I stepped protectively between Peggy and Sarah, feeling my own military training resurface despite years of peaceful civilian life. "Mrs. Whitman, We've reviewed all HOA regulations extensively. Decorative lawn ornaments under 18 inches are specifically permitted in Section 8. R. She cut me off with the kind of venom usually reserved for actual enemies. Expired regulations. New safety standards went into effect while she was deployed. Your approval means absolutely nothing now. This ornament creates a visual obstruction that threatens pedestrian safety and violates our updated aesthetic guidelines. What struck me as particularly bizarre was how Peggy's voice cracked slightly when she mentioned maintaining standards. Like those words carried far more emotional weight than a simple neighborhood dispute should warrant. Something deeper was driving this obsessive need for control. But I wouldn't understand the complete picture until much later. Sarah's military instincts engaged automatically, her voice taking on that measured tone that means she's shifting into command mode. Ma'am, could you please provide documentation of these alleged new regulations? I'd be happy to review any updated community standards that were implemented during my deployment. But Peggy was already dialing her phone with theatrical desperation, clearly having planned this exact escalation from the moment she spotted Sarah's car in our driveway. 911, emergency services. She announced loudly enough for half the neighborhood to hear. I need police officers dispatched immediately to Cedar Ridge Estates. There's a military resident who just returned from deployment displaying aggressive behavior and intimidating an elderly community member. Her voice trembled with manufactured fear as she continued her Oscar-worthy performance. I'm 58 years old. I live alone, and I genuinely fear for my safety. This person seems to think that wearing a military uniform gives them special privileges to ignore our neighborhood laws and intimidate longtime residents who dare to question their actions. Sarah asked me quietly, genuine bewilderment evident in her voice. Has this woman completely lost touch with reality? I literally just stepped out of my car 5 minutes ago. I was equally confused and increasingly angry. I have absolutely no idea what's happening here. But I definitely don't like where this is heading. The 911 call was pure theatrical performance, designed to create maximum drama while painting Sarah as some kind of unstable military aggressor. What none of us knew at the time was that this wasn't Peggy's first emergency call about military families in our neighborhood, and her pattern of false reports had already triggered something she never anticipated. Officer David Chen arrived exactly 7 minutes later, his squad cars flashing lights, creating the kind of neighborhood spectacle that brings people to their windows with phones ready to record. Neighbors started emerging from houses around us, some clearly expecting standard HOA drama, but others sensing something bigger was about to unfold. Chen stepped out looking like he'd handled this exact scenario roughly 1,000 times before. 12-year police veteran with the weary professionalism that comes from dealing with suburban disputes. But I noticed something different when he spotted Sarah's uniform. His posture straightened slightly, and his expression shifted to the respectful attention that veterans recognize in each other instantly. Peggy launched immediately into her victim performance without waiting for any questions. Officer, thank God you're finally here. This military person just returned from deployment and is already causing serious problems in our peaceful community. I'm 58 years old. I've lived alone since my husband passed away, and I feel genuinely threatened by this aggressive behavior. She gestured dramatically at our innocent garden gnome, like it was some kind of weapon of mass destruction. They seem to think that wearing a military uniform gives them unlimited authority to ignore our community laws and intimidate longtime residents. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I have never witnessed such blatant disrespect for civilian authority. But Officer Chen wasn't paying attention to Peggy's theatrical performance. His eyes were fixed on Sarah's rank insignia, her military bearing, and the way she stood with quiet confidence, despite being falsely accused of aggression. Years of Marines Reserves training had taught him to recognize genuine military professionalism when he saw it. Sarah removed her military cap with practiced precision and stood with the kind of bearing that immediately identifies someone accustomed to command responsibility. Her voice remained perfectly calm and respectful. Everything Peggy's wasn't. Officer Chen, she said, reading his name tag with genuine military courtesy. I'm Commander Sarah Thompson, United States Navy Intelligence. I just completed a 9-month classified deployment and returned home approximately 10 minutes ago. I'm not entirely certain what the specific issue is, but I'm completely willing to cooperate with your investigation. That was the exact moment when everything changed completely. Officer Chen immediately recognized not just Sarah's rank, but the calm professionalism and respectful demeanor that marked her as a genuine military leader rather than the aggressive troublemaker Peggy had described. "Ma'am, thank you for your service to our country," Chen said with obvious respect. "Could you help me understand what seems to be the situation here?" Peggy's voice cracked with rising panic as she realized her carefully planned victim narrative wasn't working according to script. "Don't ask her anything. I'm the one who called you for help. I'm the victim in this situation. She's using advanced military psychological tactics to manipulate you, just like she tried to manipulate me." Sarah opened a small folder she'd retrieved from her car with the kind of military precision that turns simple actions into demonstrations of competence. "Officer Chen, there appears to be some confusion about our lawn ornament compliance. Here is documentation showing that decorative items under 18 inches are specifically permitted under Section 8. 2 of our Homeowners Association guidelines." She pointed to the relevant passage in our community handbook, then gestured toward our small garden gnome. "This ornament measures exactly 14 inches in height and poses no safety hazard to pedestrian traffic or vehicular visibility." Chen took his time reviewing the documentation with the thoroughness of an experienced officer, and I could see the exact moment when he realized what was really happening here. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to something approaching irritation as he processed the false nature of Peggy's emergency call. "Ma'am," he said, looking directly at Sarah with obvious respect, "everything in this documentation appears completely legal and properly authorized according to standard community regulations." Then he asked the question that would deliver on our title promise and flipped this entire confrontation completely upside down. "Ma'am, given your military experience and leadership background, how would you recommend we handle this particular situation?" Peggy's entire world crumbled in real time as the power dynamic she'd tried to create got reversed completely. You could actually watch her face change as she realized that her 911 call had backfired spectacularly, transforming her from the authority figure she'd imagined herself to be into exactly what she was, a woman who'd wasted police resources with false accusations. "You can't do this," she sputtered, her voice climbing toward hysteria. "You can't ask her for advice. I called you here to deal with her, not to take orders from her. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. This is my community. I know everyone who matters here." But Officer Chen wasn't finished delivering justice. What he said next would reveal something that made my blood run cold. And when Sarah started connecting the dots, we realized we weren't dealing with a typical neighborhood Karen. We were dealing with something far more systematic, more calculated, and potentially more dangerous than either of us had imagined. Have you ever been so wrong about someone that it completely changed your perspective on everything you thought you knew? Because what Officer Chen revealed next would transform this simple neighbor dispute into something that would eventually require federal intervention. Officer Chen pulled me aside while Sarah maintained her professional composure, speaking in the low, too measured tone that experienced cops use when they're about to drop a bombshell. "Sir, I need you to understand something important," he said quietly. "This address has been flagged in our system. Mrs. Whitman has made 14 separate emergency calls in the past 6 months, and every single one has been determined to be either false or grossly exaggerated." I felt my stomach drop as the implications hit me. "You mean this isn't really about a garden gnome?" "Not even close," Chen replied, glancing back at Peggy, who was still arguing with Sarah about military privilege and civilian authority. "Our department's been building a case for harassment charges. We've been waiting for the right moment to address this pattern. And frankly, calling in false reports about a decorated Navy officer might just be that moment. The revelation that our innocent lawn ornament dispute was actually part of a much larger, more sinister pattern made everything click into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't random neighborhood pettiness. This was systematic harassment disguised as community enforcement." Chen returned to where Peggy was still lecturing Sarah about respecting longtime residents, and his demeanor had shifted to something far more serious. "Mrs. Whitman, filing false police reports is a criminal matter. Based on this documentation, your complaint appears to be completely without merit. You've wasted valuable city resources with what amounts to a frivolous emergency call." Peggy's face went through a rapid series of expressions: shock, anger, denial, and finally a kind of desperate calculation as she realized her usual tactics weren't working. "This is discrimination against elderly community members. You're all conspiring to protect her because she wears a uniform. Sarah demonstrated the kind of grace under pressure that exemplifies military leadership at its finest. Officer Chen, I genuinely appreciate your professionalism and service to our community. I don't believe formal charges are necessary in this situation. Mrs. Whitman appears to be confused about the proper procedures. Chen tipped his hat with obvious respect. Thank you for your understanding. Commander, I sincerely apologize for this inconvenience on your first day home from deployment. As his squad car disappeared down our street, neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama began approaching, with expressions ranging from curiosity to obvious embarrassment. But what they said next would start unraveling a conspiracy that had been festering in our neighborhood for months. Janet Stevens, our neighbor from 3 houses down, approached with obvious hesitation. Sarah, Jake, I'm so sorry about what just happened, but I think there are some things you need to know about Peggy's behavior that go way beyond tonight's incident. Janet glanced around nervously before continuing. I've been documenting her activities for the past 4 months. Photos, videos, detailed logs of her interactions with different families. What happened to you tonight isn't isolated. It's part of a pattern. She pulled out her phone and showed us a carefully organized photo album that made my blood run cold. Dozens of images showing Peggy approaching different houses, always carrying her clipboard, always confronting families while children played in backgrounds. But as I looked closer, something specific about the families caught my attention. Janet, are all of these military families? Sarah asked, her intelligence training immediately identifying the pattern I was struggling to see. Every single one, Janet confirmed. In the past 18 months, she systematically targeted every military family in our neighborhood. The Rodriguezes moved away last spring after months of harassment about their flag display. The Johnsons relocated in July after she reported their children's bikes as safety hazards every single week. The Patels left in September after she claimed their outdoor grill violated fire safety regulations. The scope of what Janet was revealing hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't random neighborhood enforcement. This was deliberate, calculated targeting of military families using HOA regulations as weapons. There's something else, Janet continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. All of the families she's driven away had children between 8 and 12 years old, and she always escalates her harassment right after the service member returns from deployment. Sarah's expression shifted to something I'd only seen during her most serious briefings. That's not a coincidence. That's operational planning. What Janet showed us next would explain everything about Peggy's bizarre obsession with military families. But it would also reveal a level of calculation that bordered on genuinely frightening. She scrolled through her documentation, pointing out details I'd never noticed. Look at the timing. Peggy researches deployment schedules somehow. She knows when people are coming home, and she's always ready with some manufactured violation the day they return. The evidence was overwhelming and absolutely chilling. Peggy hadn't stumbled into this confrontation with us. She'd planned it, researched it, and executed it with the precision of someone who'd done this many times before. What we can't figure out, Janet continued, is why she specifically targets military families. Tom Bradley thinks she just enjoys the power trip. But this feels personal, like she has some kind of grudge against service members specifically. That evening, Sarah used her intelligence training to conduct what she called neighborhood reconnaissance, systematically interviewing families who'd witnessed Peggy's behavior. What she discovered would eventually explain everything, but it would also reveal that our conflict was about to escalate far beyond anything a local police officer could handle. The next morning brought an email that confirmed our worst fears about Peggy's calculated approach to neighborhood warfare. Emergency HOA meeting tomorrow, 7:00 p.m. Mandatory attendance for all residents regarding military family compliance with community standards. Read the official-looking message that appeared in everyone's inbox except ours. Tom Bradley, our actual elected HOA president, called Sarah, within an hour of the email going out. Sarah, I need to warn you about something. Peggy somehow scheduled this meeting without my authorization, which is a direct violation of our association bylaws. She's been calling neighbors all morning, telling them that military families are bringing base mentality into our civilian community. His voice carried obvious frustration and embarrassment. I've tried to rein in her behavior for months, but she claims she's protecting property values. Now she's convinced 5 families that you and Jake represent some kind of threat to neighborhood stability. Sarah's response was pure military strategy. Tom, we'll be attending that meeting. In fact, I think it's time, Mrs. Whitman learned what actual military precision looks like when it's applied to HOA regulations and legal documentation. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have avoided the confrontation or walked straight into what was obviously a planned ambush? Because what Sarah did next would systematically destroy every lie Peggy had constructed. But it would also trigger something none of us saw coming. The community center at 7:00 p.m. felt exactly like walking into a carefully orchestrated ambush designed to maximize psychological pressure. 8 residents sat arranged in an intimidating semicircle that clearly wasn't accidental, with Peggy positioned prominently at the front with her laptop, organized stacks of papers, and presentation materials spread across the table like some kind of official tribunal. The hostile tension was immediate and unmistakable when Sarah and I walked through the door, like stepping into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Peggy had spent the day poisoning minds with carefully crafted lies, and the evidence was written across every suspicious face in that room. Thank you all for taking time from your busy schedules to address this urgent threat to our community's safety and property values, Peggy announced with manufactured authority, clicking to the first slide of what appeared to be an extensive presentation. Her systematic character assassination was breathtaking in both its audacity and its attention to manipulative detail. She displayed photographs of our house taken from deliberately menacing angles, making our perfectly normal home appear somehow threatening. She claimed with manufactured outrage that military families were systematically undermining community standards through aggressive displays of military culture. Most manipulative of all, she presented fabricated statistics showing declining property values in neighborhoods with high concentrations of military residents, complete with official-looking graphs and charts that were pure fiction. Who among you agrees that military families need additional oversight to ensure compliance with civilian community standards? She demanded with fake democratic authority. 4 hands raised hesitantly after their owners looked around nervously to gauge the room's mood. 3 residents shifted uncomfortably without committing to either position. Tom Bradley looked increasingly uncomfortable with the entire proceedings. Peggy, shouldn't Sarah have an opportunity to respond to these allegations? Tom asked reasonably. She cut him off with aggressive dismissal. She'll just use advanced military psychological manipulation tactics to confuse all of us into ignoring obvious community violations. But Sarah was about to systematically destroy Peggy's entire elaborate charade with the kind of precision that comes from years of intelligence, work, and leadership training. When Sarah stood to respond, the room fell silent with the kind of attention that genuine authority commands. She opened her laptop with methodical efficiency and connected it to the community center's projection system with movements that demonstrated complete technological competence. Mrs. Whitman, I appreciate your concern for our community. Sarah began with diplomatic professionalism. However, your presentation contains multiple factual errors and several statements that appear to be deliberately misleading. Her systematic demolition of Peggy's lies was methodical and absolutely devastating to witness. Screen 1 displayed official HOA regulations with relevant sections highlighted in yellow. Section 4. 2 of our association bylaws clearly states that only properly elected officers are authorized to call emergency meetings, and all affected parties must receive proper notification. Mrs. Whitman, according to official association records, you hold no elected position within this organization. Screen 2 showed email timestamps and recipient lists. Additionally, residents who are the subject of association discussions must be included in meeting notifications. Excluding us from tonight's meeting violates multiple procedural requirements. Screen 3 displayed the fabricated statistics Peggy had presented alongside real data from comparable neighborhoods. Furthermore, these property value claims appear to be completely fictional. Actual market data shows that neighborhoods with military families consistently maintain higher property values due to stable employment and regular home maintenance. The crushing final blow was delivered with surgical precision that left no room for argument or deflection. Mrs. Whitman, over the past 6 months, you've made 14 false police reports about military families in our neighborhood. You've violated multiple HOA procedures, presented fabricated data to community members, and systematically harassed families based on their military service. She paused, letting the weight of those accusations settle over the room. Can you explain to everyone present exactly why you're engaging in this pattern of deceptive behavior, specifically targeting military families? Complete silence filled the room as every person present stared at Peggy with expressions ranging from shock to obvious embarrassment. The dominoes of truth began falling with swift, merciless accuracy. Peggy, is what we're hearing actually true? Have you really been filing false police reports? Asked one neighbor with obvious confusion. I clearly remember you telling me last month that the Johnson family was destroying neighborhood character. But you never mentioned they were military? Added another with growing suspicion. Why didn't you tell any of us that you've been systematically targeting service members? Demanded a third with rising anger at being manipulated. Peggy's final desperate attempt to salvage her crumbling narrative revealed something that made everyone in that room deeply uncomfortable. Her voice cracked with genuine emotional pain as she spoke. And for the first time, we glimpsed the real trauma driving her obsessive behavior. You people don't understand what military families do to communities, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. They think they can just march in here and take over everything. I've lost everything else in my life. And I won't lose this neighborhood too. The breakdown that followed was heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure. Peggy collapsed into her chair, sobbing with the kind of deep despair that comes from years of suppressed grief and misdirected anger. My son served this country, and it destroyed him. My husband died because of military contractors who cared more about profits than safety. Military culture ruins families, and I won't let it ruin this community. Tom Bradley took control and officially ended the meeting. But the damage was done. Peggy's confession had revealed something far darker than simple neighborhood harassment. This was grief-driven revenge against an entire community of people who represented everything she blamed for her personal tragedies. As neighbors filed out with obvious discomfort and confusion, Sarah approached Peggy with the kind of compassion that only someone who'd served could truly understand. Mrs. Whitman, I can't imagine the pain you've experienced. But targeting military families won't bring your son back or heal your grief. It's only creating more pain for people who've sacrificed to serve others. But what happened next would reveal that Peggy's harassment campaign had triggered something far beyond local police jurisdiction. And when federal agents knocked on our door 3 days later, we realized that our neighborhood dispute had caught the attention of people who take threats to military families very, very seriously. But what happened next would reveal that Peggy's harassment campaign had triggered something far beyond local police jurisdiction. And when federal agents knocked on our door 3 days later, we realized that our neighborhood dispute had caught the attention of people who take threats to military families very, very seriously. The morning after the disastrous HOA meeting, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and unmistakably official. Commander Thompson, this is Agent Martinez from the FBI's Domestic Security Division. We need to discuss Mrs. Margaret Whitman's pattern of targeting military families in your neighborhood. Are you available for an interview this afternoon? Sarah's face went pale as she processed the implications. Agent Martinez, how did the FBI become involved in a neighborhood dispute? Ma'am, when civilians systematically target military personnel with security clearances, especially those involved in classified operations, it becomes a federal security concern. Mrs. Whitman's activities have been flagged as potential intelligence gathering or intimidation tactics. The realization hit us both simultaneously. Peggy hadn't just been harassing random military families. She'd been specifically targeting Navy intelligence officers, Air Force pilots with top-secret clearances, and Army specialists involved in sensitive operations. What we'd assumed was grief-driven revenge was starting to look like something far more calculated and potentially dangerous. Agent Martinez, Sarah said carefully, there's something about Mrs. Whitman's personal history that you need to know before you proceed with any investigation. But what Sarah would tell the FBI about Peggy's tragic past would raise questions that none of us were prepared to answer.